slice right through the jargon, and deliver you the critical insights straight from the source.
And today we are tackling a real giant of the sports nutrition world.
Absolutely. A compound that is steeped in both overwhelming evidence and some just frustratingly persistent myths. Creatine.
It's a fascinating one, really. Our source documents, they confirm there are over 500 peer-refereed publications on creatine.
500.
500. It makes it, well, arguably the most extensively studied dietary supplement on the entire planet.
And yet, despite all that evidence, decades of it, the misinformation is just everywhere.
It is. It's really incredible. We see these long-standing questions, these myths that continue to, muddy the waters for people. And sometimes it actually stops them from using what is a very safe and very beneficial tool.
Exactly. That's why we're here. Our mission in this deep dive is guided by a huge international consensus of research experts. We are performing an evidence-based scientific evaluation to just cut through all of that noise.
Right. We want to give you a definitive, nuanced summary of creatine's efficacy and, maybe even more importantly, its safety profile.
That's the key. Because the experts we synthesized, they actually identified 12 major questions and misconceptions that just keep popping up.
These are the real hang-ups, right? The persistent fears, the doubts about how to use it that you see all over online forums, even in, gym locker rooms.
And we're going to use this mountain of data to answer every single one of them.
With scientific certainty.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start settling some scores and move creatine firmly out of that suspect supplement box.
And into established nutritional aid.
First, let's just make sure we are all on the same page. Before we start busting any myths, what exactly is creatine on a chemical and biological level?
Right. So creatine is a naturally occurring compound. It's technically classified as a non-protein amino acid. The full chemical name is methylguanidine acetic acid.
And the important thing is our bodies already make this, right? We're not introducing some totally foreign substance.
Exactly. It's formed endogenously so internally in our kidneys and our liver. It's made from 3 precursor amino acids: arginine, glycine, and methionine.
So we have a natural supply line for it already working inside of us.
We do. We produce about 1 to 2 grams every single day, but we also get it exogenously from our diet.
Primarily from meat and fish, I believe.
That's right. For example, a typical omnivore's diet, it contains about 0.7 grams of creatine for every 6-ounce serving of meat.
So that means vegetarians and vegans, they're starting from a much lower baseline.
They are. They tend to have significantly lower muscle creatine stores, which, makes supplementation particularly impactful for them.
That sets the stage perfectly. So let's dive straight into the big one. The misconception that causes the most fear and, frankly, the most confusion. Myth number 1. Is creatine an anabolic steroid?
Right.
I mean, it's so powerful at increasing strength and muscle mass, you can kind of see where the confusion comes from, but scientifically, they are worlds apart.
They are completely, fundamentally different compounds. Chemically, mechanistically, and of course, legally.
Let's start with the chemical and the mechanistic difference. What is a steroid?
Anabolic steroids are synthetic versions of the primary male sex hormone, testosterone. So they are, by definition, androgenic hormones.
And their mechanism is hormonal.
Yes. They work by binding to intracellular androgen receptors inside the cell. That sends a signal to the nucleus of the cell to ramp up gene expression, specifically for muscle protein synthesis. It's a direct hormonal command to grow muscle.
A direct hormonal signal. Okay, so how does creatine's action compare to that? Because it's nothing like it.
Nothing at all. Creatine has 0 interaction with androgen receptors. Its chemical structure looks nothing like a steroid molecule. Its entire mechanism is purely metabolic.
So it's about energy, not hormones.
It's all about energy. Once you ingest it and it gets into the muscle cell, creatine is converted to something called phosphocreatine, or PCR. Think of PCR as a rapid energy buffer. It can donate its phosphate group to rapidly resynthesize adenosine triphosphate ATP.
And ATP is the universal energy currency for every cell in our body. It's what powers everything.
It's the fuel. So the performance boost you get from creatine, that ability to squeeze out one more rep or lift a heavier weight or sprint a little faster, it comes from being able to regenerate that ATP energy much more quickly during high-intensity exercise.
So you're just boosting your cell's internal energy capacity. You can sustain a high level of effort for just a little bit longer.
Precisely. And that increased capacity to train harder, to handle more volume over time,
Yeah.
that is what subsequently leads to hypertrophy and strength gains. It's an indirect effect from better training, not a direct hormonal signal like you get from a steroid.
And the legal difference is just as stark. I mean, when people think of steroids, they think illegal controlled substances.
As they should. Anabolic steroids are drugs. They are Class C, Schedule III controlled substances. They're regulated by the FDA, and they fall under the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA.
So possession without a prescription is a serious crime.
Absolutely. It carries severe legal ramifications. Creatine, on the other hand, is regulated completely differently.
How is it classified?
Creatine, well, it's in the same category as protein powder or vitamins. It's classified as a dietary supplement under the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, which is called DSHEA.
So it's basically treated like a food item, not a drug.
Exactly. It falls under FDA Good Manufacturing Practices, or GMP. There are zero legal ramifications for owning it or taking it, so, chemically, functionally, legally. The comparison is just completely without merit.
That's a critical distinction.
Okay.
Let's move on to the next major fear. This is the one that really keeps people away. Myth number 2. Does creatine cause kidney damage or renal dysfunction?
Ah, yes. This myth has a remarkable staying power. It's probably second only to the myth that high protein intake is bad for your kidneys.
And it seems to stem from a basic misunderstanding of how creatine is metabolized.
It does. It comes from a misunderstanding of creatine and creatinine, and it was amplified by a single, highly sensationalized, and frankly poorly interpreted case study that was published way back in 1998.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because the fear comes from the fact that supplementing with creatine can raise your blood creatinine levels. And creatinine is the marker doctors use to check kidney function.
That is the absolute core of the confusion. Creatine and its stored form phosphocreatine, they naturally degrade over time into a waste product. That waste product is called creatinine.
And it's the kidney's job to filter that waste out.
Correct. The creatinine is filtered by the kidneys and then excreted in your urine. So doctors, quite correctly, use serum creatinine levels as a proxy marker for what's called the glomerular filtration rate, or GFR, basically how well the kidneys are filtering waste.
But the problem, the nuance that gets lost, is that the amount of creatinine you produce isn't a fixed number. It's directly tied to your muscle mass and, crucially, how much creatine you're eating.
Precisely. The more muscle you have, the more creatinine you produce naturally. And if you start taking supplemental creatine, even just the standard 3 to 5 grams a day, you are going to see a predictable, transient increase in the amount of creatinine in your blood and urine.
And the fear was that making the kidneys work a little harder to clear this extra creatinine would somehow damage them, like an overload.
That was the unsubstantiated fear, that you're somehow overloading the kidneys and causing structural damage.
Which was then fueled by that infamous 1998 case study. Let's break that down because it's a great example of how misinformation can start.
It's a perfect lesson in misinterpreting preliminary data. This was a single case study. It reported on one young man who already had a serious pre-existing chronic kidney disease. It was called focal segmental glomerulosclerosis.
So he was already very sick.
Very sick. He was also taking a powerful immunosuppressive drug, cyclosporine. He then started a creatine regimen, a 15-gram loading phase, and when his blood creatinine went up, as expected, the researchers mistakenly concluded it was evidence his kidneys were deteriorating further.
So they completely ignored his underlying degenerative kidney condition and the fact that the drug he was on, cyclosporine, is known to be nephrotoxic. It can harm the kidneys all by itself.
Exactly. They ignored all of that. And they ignored the simple fact that any healthy person taking creatine would see a rise in that same proxy marker. It was flawed from the start.
I remember other scientists pushed back on it immediately.
They did. Multiple researchers wrote to the journal Lancet where it was published, pointing out the huge methodological flaws. They pointed to dozens of other studies that already showed no negative impact on healthy kidneys. But, by then the headline was out. The myth had taken root.
So let's fast forward to today. For a healthy person using creatine, what does the definitive long-term evidence tell us about kidney function? Should you worry if your doctor says your creatinine is a little high?
The overwhelming body of evidence, after nearly 30 years of surveillance, hundreds of controlled trials, thousands and thousands of exposures in athletes, it all confirms the same thing.
Which is?
Creatine supplementation, when you take it at the recommended dosages of 3 to 5 grams per day, does not result in kidney damage or renal dysfunction in healthy individuals. It's just not a concern.
So it might elevate that marker, the creatinine level.
It might, yes. But that is a functional change based on your increased intake. It is not, and I want to be clear on this, it is not evidence of structural damage to the kidney itself. It's critical that doctors and clinicians recognize that creatinine is simply an unreliable marker of kidney health in people who are supplementing with creatine.
Excellent clarity. Okay, that covers the core safety fears. Let's move on to the body image concerns, which are often the next barrier for people. Myth number 3. Does creatine lead to water retention or bloating?
This is one of the most common aesthetic complaints, and it's interesting because it's based on sound science, but it's really misinterpreted data.
So there's a kernel of truth to it.
There is. Creatine is an osmotically active substance, so to get transported into the muscle cell, it needs to be co-transported with sodium. And water, as we know, follows sodium to maintain the cell's balance.
So water gets pulled into the muscle cell.
Exactly. This is called intracellular water, or ICW, water inside the cell.
So if I start that classic loading phase 20 grams a day, I'm probably going to see the scale jumped up by a few pounds pretty quickly. Where is that initial water going?
It is, and early research showed this very clearly. During that initial aggressive loading phase, you are definitely retaining water. It often results in a weight gain of, say, 1 to 3 kilograms, so 2 to 6 pounds or so.
And is that all going into the muscle?
Not initially. Studies during that short loading period showed increases in total body water, but also increases in extracellular water, or ECW. That's the water outside the cells.
And that's what people perceive as generalized bloat.
That's the feeling of bloat. But, and this is a huge but, the long-term data, once you switch to a maintenance dose, tells a very different story.
So the initial bloating is real, but it doesn't stick around.
It absolutely refutes the idea of persistent, undesirable, general bloating over the long term. When scientists track people for longer periods, 5, 10, even 12 weeks, on a standard maintenance dose of 3 to 5 grams a day,
What do they find?
they find no significant increases in total body water, or crucially, in that extracellular water, relative to the amount of muscle mass they have. The ratios stabilize.
So the increase in water that is sustained is primarily inside the muscle cell, the ICW. And that's actually a good thing, isn't it?
It is the key to the whole benefit. Increased intracellular water volume isn't bloat, it's an anabolic trigger. We call it cell swelling.
And that swelling acts as a signal for the muscle to grow.
A potent one. It stimulates protein synthesis and it dampens protein breakdown. It's one of the mechanisms that drives the subsequent sustained increase in actual muscle mass over time. So that myth of long-term unwanted bloat is debunked by just understanding that critical shift in water from general fluid to beneficial muscle-specific fluid.
Okay, that leads into a related fear from back in the day. Myth 4. Does creatine lead to dehydration and muscle cramping? I definitely remember in the early 2000s, big organizations like the American College of Sports Medicine were warning people to be cautious using it in the heat.
I remember that too. That caution, which came out in 2000, it was purely precautionary. It was based entirely on speculation.
What was the theory?
The theory was, well, if creatine is pulling water into the muscle cell, then maybe that could impair the body's ability to regulate its temperature and maintain fluid balance when an athlete is sweating heavily.
The idea being there's less water available for sweating and cooling the body.
Exactly, potentially causing dehydration and electrolyte imbalances that could lead to cramping. It was a plausible hypothesis.
But did the real-world controlled evidence ever actually back that up?
Not at all. In fact, the experimental evidence overwhelmingly contradicts that hypothesis. It's a classic case of a good theory not holding up to the data.
But people still report it anecdotally.
They do. Some surveys suggested, I think it was 27% of users perceived more cramping. But when you put it to the test in a controlled trial, you see the opposite.
Like that study on the NCAA football players.
That's the definitive one. They monitored injury rates in Division IA collegiate football players across an entire season, often training in very demanding, hot, humid conditions.
And the result was pretty surprising.
The irony is rich, isn't it? The creatine users experienced significantly less cramping, fewer total musculoskeletal injuries, and fewer episodes of heat illness or dehydration compared to the players who weren't taking it.
So it was actually protective, not harmful.
It appeared to mitigate rather than exacerbate all of these heat-related issues.
Wow. That's a powerful and really counterintuitive finding. It suggests creatine actually helps you stay hydrated in these high-stress environments.
And that's backed up in clinical settings, too. There was a study with hemodialysis patients. They often suffer from really bad muscle cramps because of the fluid shifts during treatment.
And creatine helped them.
A 12-gram daily dose of creatine reduced the frequency of their symptomatic muscle cramping by 60%. So the evidence is just very, very strong. Creatine does not cause and may actually help prevent dehydration and muscle cramping.
Okay, next up, another common aesthetic worry. Myth number 5. Does creatine increase fat mass? I think this is a simple one. The scale goes up, so people worry it must be fat.
And it's a concern that is just completely invalidated by randomized controlled trials. You can look across any demographic you want. Young men, older adults, women.
The results are all the same.
All the same. Studies lasting anywhere from 1 week up to 2 full years consistently show that creatine supplementation does not increase total fat mass or your percentage body fat. The mass you gain is lean tissue, period.
It's driven by that initial intracellular water, and then actual muscle growth over time when you pair it with training.
Unequivocally.
And I even recall seeing a systematic review that suggested it might help accelerate fat loss, particularly in older adults who are resistance training.
That's a really key finding. A meta-analysis that focused specifically on adults aged 50 and up found that when you combine creatine with resistance training, it resulted in a greater reduction in overall body fat percentage.
So they actually lost more fat than the placebo group.
They did. The creatine group lost about half a kilogram, or a little over a pound, more fat mass than the groups just doing resistance training alone. It seems to support the metabolic environment you need for preserving lean mass and maybe even mobilizing fat during training.
So we've covered body composition. Let's shift to usage protocols. Myth number 6. Is a creatine loading phase required? You know, that classic strategy of 20 to 25 grams a day for the first week.
The loading phase, it was developed back in the early 90s, and it is undeniably effective at one thing.
And what's that?
Rapidly maximizing your intramuscular creatine stores. It'll boost your storage by about 20% in just a matter of days. So for an athlete who needs that ergogenic potential immediately, it works.
But the big question is it strictly necessary to get the long-term benefits?
No, it is not. The scientific consensus is very clear on this. A much lower daily dose, that standard maintenance dose of 3 to 5 grams per day, will achieve the exact same maximum muscle saturation levels.
It just takes a little longer.
It just takes longer. You need to sustain that low dose for a minimum of about 4 weeks to reach the same peak levels you'd get from a 1-week load.
So for someone planning to use it for months or years, the low-dose strategy is just as effective in the long run.
It is. The choice really just depends on your timeline and, frankly, your tolerance for some of the side effects of loading.
Right. So if you're a track athlete with a major competition in 2 weeks, loading makes sense.
Exactly. You load. But if you're just a regular person who plans on using it for the next year and you want to avoid that quick jump in water weight, or maybe you have a sensitive stomach,
then the 3 to 5 gram daily dose is the better way to go.
it's the superior long-term protocol for most people.
You mentioned a sensitive stomach. What's the caution around the loading phase and GI issues?
The main issue comes when people try to take too much at once. Doses that are greater than 10 grams in a single serving can sometimes overwhelm the gut's ability to absorb it all.
And that leads to
Uncomfortable gastrointestinal distress, usually diarrhea. So if you do choose to load, the strong recommendation is to break that 20 or 25 gram daily total into smaller, manageable 5-gram servings and spread them out across the day.
Now we arrive at what is maybe the most persistent modern-day myth, the one that keeps so many new users, especially men, away. Myth number 7, does creatine cause hair loss or baldness?
This one is just a perfect storm. It's a perfect example of how a single piece of preliminary data can get misinterpreted, spread like wildfire online, and cause mass anxiety.
And the entire fear, the entire global conversation about this, it all stems from one specific study from 2009.
That's it. The whole thing comes from a study by Vander Merwe and his colleagues. It's often just called the rugby player study.
So let's get into the details of that origin study. What were they actually looking for and what did they find?
It was a pretty standard design for the time, a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study. They had 20 college-aged male rugby players.
And they put them on a classic creatine protocol.
A very classic protocol. A 25 gram per day loading phase for 7 days, then they dropped down to a 5 gram per day maintenance phase for another 2 weeks. Their goal was just to see how it affected their hormones.
And which key hormone did they see increase that just lit the internet on fire?
They found a statistically significant increase in serum dihydrotestosterone. DHT.
which is the primary androgen, the hormone that's directly implicated in male pattern baldness.
It's the one. The study showed that DHT increased by 56% after the 1-week loading period, and it was still about 40% above their baseline after the 2 weeks of maintenance. The ratio of DHT to total testosterone also went up significantly.
And on paper, those numbers sound really alarming. If you're a guy worried about your hair, a 56% increase in the hair loss hormone is terrifying.
It is terrifying, but there was a critical, often ignored nuance in the data regarding the absolute values.
And this is the piece that got completely lost in translation.
It's the most essential takeaway. While the percentage increase was statistically significant relative to their own starting point, the final DHT level remained well within normal clinical limits.
So they went from a normal level to a still normal level.
Exactly. Furthermore, their total testosterone levels did not change at all. What this suggests is not an overall increase in androgen production, but a slight change in the rate of conversion of testosterone into DHT.
A process that's driven by an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase.
That's the one. So the theory was that creatine might have slightly upregulated that enzyme's activity, but the end result was a DHT level that was still considered perfectly healthy and normal by any medical standard.
So for years, the science was kind of stuck there. We had this one small study suggesting a hormonal blip.
Right. And then we had 12 other subsequent studies that looked at testosterone and free testosterone, which you need to make DHT, and all 12 of them reported no significant changes in any androgens at all.
The evidence was contradictory, but the fear just wouldn't die.
It persisted. So the scientific community knew they had to cut through that noise. They needed to go beyond just looking at blood work and actually look at the hair itself.
And recently, we finally got that study, the definitive one.
We did. The 2025 randomized controlled trial by Laak and his colleagues. This study was designed specifically to address the hair loss hypothesis with the most rigorous methodology we have available today.
What did they do?
They recruited resistance-trained men, and they gave them 5 grams of creatine a day for 12 weeks. And the key was how they measured the outcome.
They weren't just taking blood samples. They used objective clinical dermatology tools, right?
That's what makes this study the final word on the matter. They used the photo finder system and the trichogram test. These are specialized, high-tech systems that dermatologists use every day to assess hair health with incredible precision.
And they focused on the vertex of the scalp, the crown, which is a critical area for pattern baldness.
The most critical area, and they measured everything. Hair density, total hair count, follicular unit count, the cumulative thickness of the hair, and that crucial ratio of hairs in the anagen or growth phase versus the telogen or resting and shedding phase.
So what were the findings after 3 months of consistent use? Did creatine actually make their hair fall out?
Absolutely not. Across the board, there were no significant differences between the creatine group and the placebo group for any hormonal changes. No change in total testosterone, free testosterone, DHT, or the DHT to T ratio.
What about the hair itself?
Critically, there were no changes over time or between the groups for any of the direct hair outcomes. This study provides just incredibly strong clinical evidence to refute the claim that creatine contributes to hair loss or thinning.
So using the very tools that a dermatologist would use to diagnose hair loss, they found nothing.
Nothing at all. It puts a decisive end to the scientific debate.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, what it really tells us is that even if that minor hormonal fluctuation from the 2009 study is real, which is debatable,
Right.
it doesn't actually translate physiologically into any measurable harm to the hair follicle. The supposed cause doesn't lead to the feared effect.
That's the perfect way to put it. It provides the causal link that was missing. The fear was based on a proxy marker, DHT, showing a tiny, clinically insignificant increase. The definitive work now shows this doesn't trigger the physiological response, the actual hair loss that people were worried about.
But we should still offer a small caution for the listener who knows they have a strong genetic predisposition to pattern baldness.
Absolutely, you have to be responsible. While the science debunks the direct causation link, if you have a strong family history of androgenetic alopecia, you are, by definition, more sensitive to DHT. So any minor hormonal fluctuation, even within clinical limits, could theoretically accelerate a condition you already have.
So it's not that creatine causes baldness, but for a very small vulnerable group, it might speed up the inevitable.
It's possible, but that's about managing a pre-existing genetic vulnerability, not avoiding a supplement that is, for all intents and purposes, safe for your hair.
That brings us to efficacy. Creatine has this stereotype as a supplement just for young guys in the weight room, trying to max out their bench press. Myth number 8. Is creatine only useful for resistance or power-type activities?
It's such a limited view of what this compound can do. The sources we have show its applications for performance and recovery are just far more versatile.
Exponentially broader.
Yes. Let's look beyond just the heavy lift or the short sprint. First, think about the metabolic advantages for endurance athletes or athletes in high-volume sports like soccer.
How does it help them?
Well, when you take creatine alongside carbohydrates, it promotes a significantly greater storage of muscle glycogen compared to just consuming carbohydrates alone. We call this glycogen supercompensation.
And why is more glycogen so important for, say, a marathon runner?
Glycogen is the primary fuel stored in your muscles for prolonged activity. So being able to rapidly and completely replenish that glycogen is vital for recovery. It helps prevent the effects of overtraining, especially for athletes who are just depleting massive stores day after day.
So it helps them refuel more effectively, which means they can train harder, more consistently.
Exactly. It translates to sustained performance over a long, grueling season.
And then there's the recovery and injury prevention side of it, which really applies to almost every athlete in any sport.
This is absolutely critical. Creatine has been shown to reduce muscle damage and soreness after intense exercise. We can actually quantify this by looking at the reduced efflux of muscle damage enzymes like creatine kinase into the bloodstream.
So you're objectively less damaged after a hard workout.
You are. Studies show athletes taking it experience less muscle damage, less inflammation, and reduced soreness after really taxing events like a 30-kilometer race.
We touched on that football study earlier where they saw less cramping. Did they also see a reduction in overall injuries?
They did. That same study noted a significant reduction in the rate of overall musculoskeletal injuries among the creatine users.
And it even helps when you do get injured.
Yes, this is huge. Creatine has been shown to accelerate recovery time from an injury, and it dramatically reduces muscle atrophy during periods when you're immobilized.
Like when you're in a cast.
Exactly. When an athlete is in a cast or on bed rest after surgery, creatine helps preserve that muscle mass. So it's a crucial tool not just for performance, but for career longevity and rehabilitation.
And we can't forget thermoregulation. The old myth was it caused dehydration, but the reality is it's protective in the heat.
It acts as a hyperhydrating agent. Because it's pulling that water inside the muscle cells, it actually increases your total body water volume. This enhanced hydration status translates into a better ability to regulate your body temperature.
So you can tolerate exercise better in hot and humid conditions.
And you significantly reduce your risk of heat-related illness. It's a major safety benefit.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. The potential neuroprotective effects. This takes creatine completely out of the gym and into the realm of cellular health.
This is by far the most compelling emerging area of research with huge public health implications. The evidence from animal models is just profound. Creatine supplementation is highly neuroprotective.
What kind of protection are we talking about?
It's been shown to reduce the severity of outcomes following a spinal cord injury, following cerebral ischemia, which is like a stroke, and most relevant to athletes, following a concussion or traumatic brain injury, a TBI.
So why does a muscle energy buffer suddenly become a brain shield? What's the mechanism in the central nervous system?
Well, the brain is an incredibly metabolically active organ. It relies almost entirely on oxygen and glucose to produce its ATP, its energy.
It's an energy hog.
A massive energy hog. And following a traumatic event, like a concussion, there's a huge wave of cellular energy demand. The brain cells are struggling to maintain balance, and you get what's called an energy crisis.
And creatine helps buffer that crisis.
It does. By providing that immediately available pool of phosphocreatine, it helps the brain cells maintain their energy status during that critical period.
So it's mitigating the secondary damage that happens after the initial physical impact.
Precisely. By buffering ATP, creatine helps blunt that whole secondary injury cascade, things like oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, all the things that are responsible for the lasting damage and the cognitive symptoms of a concussion.
The evidence for this is strong enough that major organizations are making recommendations now.
It is. The evidence is so compelling that the International Society of Sports Nutrition, the ISSN, now formally recommends that athletes in collision sports, think football, hockey, rugby, should consider taking creatine specifically for this prophylactic neuroprotective effect.
That's a huge shift. It's moving creatine from a performance enhancer to a proactive therapeutic compound, a safety tool.
Safety tool, exactly.
Now let's challenge another assumption, that creatine is only for men. Myth number 9. Is creatine only effective for males? The research we have highlights that females, especially with their unique hormonal changes, can see different but equally critical benefits across their whole lifespan.
This is such a crucial point that's often missed. Creatine kinetics, so how it's absorbed, stored, and used, are actually influenced by the hormonal shifts women experience, specifically changes in estrogen and progesterone.
How do those hormones affect it?
Well, they can influence the function and the expression of the creatine transporters that get creatine into the muscle. And as a baseline, females often have naturally lower creatine stores than men, and also lower levels in the frontal lobe of the brain.
So they might have even more to gain from supplementation. Let's break down some of the female-specific benefits, starting with muscle and bone.
In terms of performance, it works just as you'd expect. Creatine plus resistance training has been shown to successfully increase muscle mass and strength in young women. But the really critical benefits extend into later life.
For postmenopausal women.
Especially for postmenopausal women, where the risks of sarcopenia muscle loss and bone mineral density loss just skyrocket. Creatine is a potent ally against that.
How does it impact bone health specifically?
There was a great study. It followed postmenopausal women for 52 weeks. The group that combined creatine supplementation with supervised resistance training significantly attenuated the rate of bone mineral loss at the femoral neck.
At the hip.
At the hip, compared to the placebo group. And that is profound, because hip fractures are a major cause of disability and death in that population.
So it's a vital nutritional strategy for combating that age-related decline in bone.
When paired with exercise, yes.
And then there are the neurological and mood benefits, which seems really relevant given what you said about lower baseline creatine in the female brain.
The research here is really promising. Supplementation has shown it can help in managing mood disorders. There were studies using advanced imaging, like magnetic resonance spectroscopy.
So they could actually see the creatine levels in the brain.
They could. And they showed that creatine supplementation significantly increased cerebral phosphocreatine levels. And this increase was inversely related to symptoms of depression.
Meaning as brain creatine went up, depression symptoms went down.
Exactly. And this was particularly effective in adolescent females who were resistant to standard treatments like SSRIs. It seems that improving the brain's fundamental energy status has a direct positive impact on emotional regulation.
And finally, let's touch on the implications for pregnancy and fetal health. This is almost never talked about in the mainstream.
And it should be. The preclinical animal studies are immensely compelling. Maternal creatine supplementation has been shown to have a powerful protective effect against fetal death and organ damage that's associated with intrapartum hypoxia.
Oxygen deprivation during birth.
Yes, which can be just devastating. We know that the placenta has an intense metabolic demand, and it can significantly lower the mother's own circulating creatine pool late in pregnancy.
And that's been linked to poor outcomes.
It has. Researchers have found that reduced maternal creatine late in pregnancy is associated with low fetal growth. It potentially links poor creatine status to things like low birth weight or preterm birth.
So it could be a safe, low-cost way to reduce complications tied to cellular energy depletion during that critical time.
That's the implication. It really raises an important question. Given the low-risk profile and the fact that we know vegetarian or vegan women have lower baseline status, what are the implications of using creatine as a preventative nutrient for women across their entire lifespan? It goes way beyond just muscle gain.
It becomes fundamental public health nutrition.
Okay.
Finally, let's address aging more broadly. Myth 10. Is creatine beneficial for older adults? Sarcopenia, that age-related loss of muscle and strength, is a global health crisis.
It's a massive concern. It dramatically increases the risk of falls, of fragility, of the loss of independence. And while resistance training is always going to be the cornerstone for fighting it,
creatine is a powerful enhancer for that process.
a potent synergistic enhancer, yes.
But can an older adult just take creatine and expect to get stronger if they're not exercising?
The data suggests no. Creatine alone, without that mechanical resistance from training, is unlikely to result in substantial gains in strength or functional performance. Any initial lean mass gains you see in long-term studies are often just that intracellular water we talked about.
So the magic really happens when you combine the two.
That's where it happens. It augments the natural anabolic response to lifting weights.
So you get more bang for your buck from your workouts.
Precisely. You see significantly greater gains in both strength and muscle mass compared to just resistance training alone. And just as importantly, you see improvements in functional performance metrics.
Things that matter for daily living.
Things that really matter, like the 30-second chair stand test or the arm curl test. It helps mitigate that functional decline that comes with sarcopenia.
And once again, this circles back to bone health, which is so critical for older adults.
The synergistic effect extends there too. When you combine it with resistance training, creatine has been shown to increase upper limb bone mineral content and, as we said, attenuate bone loss in postmenopausal women over a full year. It's a powerful tool for maintaining the entire musculoskeletal framework you need to live independently as you age.
So we've established creatine is safe, it's effective, and it's beneficial for way more people than just young male lifters. But you go online or into a supplement store, and the market is just flooded with different types. You see creatine ethyl ester, creatine HCl, buffered creatine,
All sorts of things.
which leads to myth 11. Are other forms of creatine superior to monohydrate?
The short answer is no. Creatine monohydrate powder, or CM, it remains the industry standard. And critically, it's the most extensively studied form by a massive margin going all the way back to the early 1990s.
Its track record is just impeccable.
It is, and studies confirm its absorption rate is basically perfect. Approximately 99% of the creatine monohydrate you ingest orally is absorbed into your bloodstream, and then it's either taken up by your tissues or excreted. You can't really beat 99%.
So given that near-perfect absorption, why do companies spend millions of dollars marketing all these alternative forms?
It is purely marketing. It's often based on pseudoscientific claims of superior absorption or reduced side effects, things they can't actually back up with data.
So they'll claim their version is more bioavailable or you need a lower dose.
Exactly. But there are no peer-reviewed published papers that have ever demonstrated that taking an equal amount of these alternatives, whether it's creatine salts, effervescent creatine, ethyl ester, buffered, nitrate, any of them, increases muscle creatine storage more effectively than simple, cheap monohydrate.
It's biologically impossible. If the original form is already 99% absorbed, you can't get more absorbed.
You really can't. And in fact, many of these alternatives actually break down more rapidly into creatinine before they're even absorbed, or they contain a lower percentage of actual creatine per gram of powder.
So you're paying more for less.
You're paying more for less. Creatine monohydrate powder contains the highest percentage of actual creatine, about 87.9%, and it remains the most reliable, the most cost-effective, and the most evidence-backed choice.
Okay, our final misconception addresses how creatine is handled once it leaves the factory. Myth 12. Is creatine stable in solutions beverages? And does the source matter?
Two really important practical questions. Let's start with stability. Creatine monohydrate powder, in its dry form, is exceptionally stable.
For how long?
For years. It shows virtually no degradation, even if you store it at elevated room temperatures. However, creatine is intrinsically not stable in solution. The moment you mix it with water, the clock starts ticking.
Why does it break down in water?
It degrades into that waste product, creatinine, through a process called intramolecular cyclization. It's just an inherent chemical property. And this breakdown is accelerated by two main factors: higher temperatures and lower pH levels, so acidic environments.
That perfectly explains why you never see successful, high-dose, ready-to-drink creatine beverages on the market. They'd just be bottles of creatinine by the time you bought them.
They would. So if you mix your creatine in water in the morning, you should really drink it relatively quickly. If you mix it in a sports drink and leave it in your hot gym bag for 8 hours, you're mostly just drinking creatinine by the end of the day.
And finally, the purity of that powder. Does it matter where my creatine monohydrate comes from?
It matters immensely for your safety. The quality standards are not universal. Creatine monohydrate that's manufactured in Germany, often sold under the brand name Creepier, for example, uses very specific, rigorous synthesis methods. It's generally reported to be 99.9% pure with virtually no contaminants.
But creatine sourced from other regions might not be so clean.
It might not be. Creatine that's sourced from other places, particularly from parts of Asia, which use different chemical precursors and different synthesis processes, has been found in testing to contain some pretty concerning contaminants.
What kind of contaminants should a listener be aware of?
Well, the list includes things like dicyandamide, which is an unnecessary byproduct, higher levels of creatinine from the start, and critically, trace amounts of something called dihydrotriazine.
And that one is a serious concern.
It is, because it is structurally related to known carcinogenic carcinogenic compounds. Furthermore, some lower quality sources have been found to contain higher concentrations of heavy metals, like mercury and lead.
So the takeaway is that creatine monohydrate is still the king, but you absolutely must prioritize purity and sourcing. Look for certified, reputable sources, like the ones that are commonly used in the actual scientific research.
Absolutely. For a supplement you might take daily for years, purity is non-negotiable.
We have certainly completed a deep dive. The science is just overwhelmingly clear. Let's quickly recap the 12 persistent myths we have decisively debunked here, using rigorous scientific evidence.
First, creatine is unequivocally not an anabolic steroid. It works via metabolic energy buffering, not hormonal signaling.
Second, it does not cause kidney damage or renal dysfunction in healthy individuals, as long as you're sticking to the recommended dosages.
Third, it does not cause that long-term generalized bloating. The sustained weight gain is primarily beneficial intracellular water, which is an anabolic signal for growth.
Fourth, it does not lead to dehydration or muscle cramping. In fact, controlled trials show it may actually reduce injury rates and heat-related illness.
Fifth, it does not increase your fat mass. It exclusively supports the gain of lean tissue and might even help with fat loss when you combine it with resistance training.
Sixth, that creatine loading phase is not required. Lower daily maintenance doses will get you the full muscle saturation within about 4 weeks.
Seventh, the big one. The claim that creatine causes hair loss or baldness has now been refuted by direct clinical evidence using objective hair follicle measurements.
Eighth, creatine's benefits extend way beyond just power activities. It offers profound benefits for recovery, injury prevention, thermoregulation, and even neuroprotection for all athletes.
Ninth, it is highly effective for females across their entire lifespan, supporting muscle, bone density, mood, and potentially offering protective effects during pregnancy.
10th, it provides significant musculoskeletal and functional benefits for older adults, especially when you pair it with resistance training to fight back against sarcopenia.
11th, no other marketed form of creatine has ever been shown to be superior to the highly absorbable, extensively researched, and cost-effective creatine monohydrate.
And finally, 12th, while the powder itself is very stable, you, the consumer, must be vigilant about purity and the manufacturing source to avoid the risk of dangerous contaminants.
The evidence really supports creatine not just as a performance enhancer, but as this extraordinarily well-tolerated, multifaceted compound that influences health on a cellular level, system-wide.
The fact that it's classified as generally recognized as safe, or GRAs, by the FDA really underscores that robust safety profile and its wide range of applications.
It does.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given all this compelling emerging evidence about creatine's neuroprotective properties, its ability to buffer energy in the brain and spinal cord, and its potential benefits for maternal health, for mood stability, for cognitive resilience across the entire lifespan, how will this growing body of knowledge fundamentally shift our future perspective? Will creatine stop being viewed as just a niche sport supplement for bodybuilders, and instead be adopted as a broader, essential public health nutrient, when used across the general population to support cellular energy, neurological function, and disease prevention? Something to explore further, perhaps.